Appfrica.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage, Dan Shine.
Hey. Good morning again. It's good to be back, and I'm very excited about the next 45 minutes to an hour, because this will, I think, be one of the most interactive things that you will be able to participate in, except perhaps for the dancing last night. So be aware that as we head towards the second half, we are going to be looking very much for your input, and I'll explain more about that as we go. The topic is the notion of scale and transforming an idea into scale, which arguably is the most difficult thing with regard to invention and innovation. Even harder in an environment in which the rules are still being made. I'm very excited to have with me for the first half of our time a set of panelists who have operated at all parts of the spectrum with regard to innovation and investment and entrepreneurship. And I mentioned something about this earlier today, but there's no question that they've all seen failure and they've learned from it, and they've all seen success and been enriched by it, and all of them share an incredible belief in the future of Africa as it relates to innovation and the fact that the next big thing most certainly can and should and will perhaps come from Africa. So I think I've got them in order, but on my left is Tutu AGYARE, who's the Managing Partner and Chief Investment Officer for Nubuke Investments in Ghana. Next to him is someone who's from my area of the country, or the world in California, is Shashi BULUSWAR, who's the CEO of the Institute of Globally Transformative Technologies. Next to him is GOSIER, who's, I think, in Philadelphia these days. So another person who's currently based in the United States. And he's the founder of DB8 Group and the founder of Appfrica. And next to him is LEBLANC, Chief Investment Officer for Awethu project in South Africa, which is also focused on entrepreneurship. So we don't have time, interestingly enough, for a lot of conversation in the 22 minutes and 43 seconds that I've got for this part of the session. So instead, what I've asked the panelists to do, or the presenters to do, is to really think deeply about what the big idea is, what the thing that they think is provocative and exciting about what's going on within within this region and within this discipline of innovation, and to talk briefly about it. And then I may ask a couple of follow-on questions, of course. So I think in no particular order, we'll just go ahead and start with Tutu, who actually talked with me a little bit earlier today and has a big idea and would like to share.
Thank you very much, everybody. A lot of the conversation today has been about Africa and Africans developing institutions and assets for themselves. We've talked a lot about minerals and mining. We've talked about financial institutions. One of the areas which I think is a disaster waiting to happen is about our data. Some of you have heard about the big IPO that's coming in the US for Alibaba, which is a big Chinese company. A lot of you have heard about QQ and the company called Tencent. And these are indigenous Chinese companies that developed purely on the basis that the Chinese decided to ban Google and Facebook from their countries so they could develop their own industries. I personally believe we will never develop the sort of companies of the size or scale of those which are extracting extraordinary amounts of our data and giving them to third parties to monetize them unless we ban these companies from our countries to allow our local entrepreneurs to develop for themselves. If you look at what is happening in India at the moment, you see that they do not and have not developed their own giants because they've allowed Amazon and Google and Facebook into their countries. They own the data, they monetize the data, you have no access to it, and I guarantee you right now that the US government has more information about you through its access to Google and Facebook and Snapchat and Vine than you do. So either you ban them so you can develop local industries, or you insist that all the data they collect is made available to your government so you can actually manage and monetize that information and leverage your resources better. That's my big idea.
Very good, and a good one it is. As one quick follow-up question to you, so it's an important question that should be asked, where is the most important forum or the most likely forum for that question to be asked and discussed and progress made? Is it within a governmental forum? Is it private industry? Is it a combination? Where should that opportunity be analyzed for best result?
I mean, there are many. It's a challenging one. I mean, I don't think it's the UN. The Millennium Development Goals are being discussed in the moment. Maybe there should be one on access to data as a goal, that Africans should have access to all the data that's been collected by them, by others, in order to be able to better utilize the resources. Maybe the next World Economic Forum should have a debate about this, because Africans are sleepwalking their way into the next disaster. It's taken us 100 years to wake up to the fact that resource nationalism needs to be a priority. And it's going to take us another 100 years before we realize that we've lost access to all of our data.
Thank you. And I think that urgency is well described. Let me go to the other end and talk with Rob, who's operating at the end of the spectrum of fostering entrepreneurship. I don't want to say at a local level, because the scale is much bigger than that, but at a very personal level with regard to the things that you're looking to and the investments and the forum that you're creating. Sort of what's your big idea, or what's the most exciting or important thing that you're watching right now?
Well, thank you. For us, I think the big idea is around people, really, and how we look for people on the continent. So traditionally, the way that talent is developed in an economy and is invested in works in a very sort of Western paradigm, where bright people are identified in primary, secondary school, they go to leading tertiary institutions, and then they come out into mature venture capital and angel type environments to find capital and grow. The challenge is that on the continent, that's working for 5, maximum 10% of people on the continent. If you believe, like we do, that talent is actually normally distributed, so not every brilliant person on the continent is born into that 5 or 10%, then you have huge wealth of talent sitting in that 80 to 90% of each economy, so in the informal sector. And so the big idea that we're working on is, can you reconstitute the way you look for and develop talent and give them a standardized, scalable way to access the formal economy through investment and development structures that we're working on in our business to basically lower the barriers to entry to the informal economy and allow that 80 to 90% of people, in which there are tens of thousands of top 1 percentile level talent looking to start and grow exciting ventures. So for me, the big idea is we can't look for talent the same way more developed countries have always looked for talent, because the institutions aren't the same, and also the sense of urgency is a lot higher. We need to find better people faster and develop them faster.
Excellent. And as you describe it, you're talking about looking for new ways to find talent, and you're talking about, though, then plugging them into a relatively traditional system, which is interesting, because I guess the other question is the traditional system the only way? And that yet to be proved. But to your big idea, I just thought, since you shared it with me earlier, how young do you look for that talent? How young do you look for that interdiction into that, to bring them to a place where they can develop?
So we've gone back as far as into mid-high school, so 15, 16 years old, 17 years old. Our sweet spot has proven to be around 22 to 28, so sort of out of school, lived life a little bit, experienced some work or tried to get work and not gotten work. And we try to, as much as we can, stay under 35, just in line with the demographic trends on the continent.
Excellent. John GOSIER, you've been involved in at least 5 different parts of this machine of doing it, and you're currently working on some things that are pretty exciting right now, which may be the big idea you want to share. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, as you mentioned, I've sit on many different sides of the spectrum. Been a serial entrepreneur both on the continent, off the continent, and an investor on the continent and off the continent. And one of the things that has become very apparent to me over the years is that one of the reasons that foreign investors and international investors and even some African investors don't invest in the continent is because of the lack of access to data around financial markets and how companies are performing across the continent. The way that our businesses are built here, it's very informal. It's very who you know, it's very much relationship-based. And that's really hard for people who are outside of those relationships to trust or value because they aren't part of those networks. And so our big idea is a new company that I've launched with a few colleagues of mine called Market Atlas, which is a solution for surfacing information about African companies, public listed companies for now, private companies later, and relating that information to people who aren't part of those relationships and those networks that make the engines here run. And so what we want to do is surface that financial data, make it accessible to investors around the globe, and make it possible for them to make better decisions when they invest in African companies.
So certainly, historically, the biggest hesitation for investment has often been the uncertainty, especially with regard to the monitoring metrics and evaluation. So you're going to be creating this data set that's going to surface and bring it through. What is the methodology or the secret sauce that you'll be using to help people trust the data when in so many times in the past figures have been inflated or you know, optimism has been a little overly acute?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what we do is we relate the product through something that looks sort of like the Bloomberg terminal. But the way the data is put into that terminal is we're building out a robust network across the continent of the types of people who facilitate these relationships now then become our data vendors. We pay them for their insights. But that's not enough because, I mean, we've seen many things go wrong with crowdsourcing in the past. And so we also collect information from all the major indexes across the continent, and we collect information about the countries, the performance data of the countries, because context matters. If you're a $100 billion company in Nigeria, it's very different than being a $100 billion company in Uganda. And so that context and what goes into creating those companies matters. And so we relate that type of information as well. The other thing is I went to art school. And so I'm very much a visual person. And so we use visualizations to relate some of the more complex ideas that are going on within the data sets.
I think there's no question that the visualization of big data as we move forward globally is going to unlock doors and accelerate access to capital. So Shashi BULUSWAR, you've been involved with Livermore, and you're a professor at Berkeley as well. You have a number of different hats that you wear. What is the most exciting thing that you think is coming, and how do you think it's going to be achieved?
Great. I'll share first philosophy and then the big idea. I come from India and work in the States, and in many ways, both the big idea and the perspective are shaped by the joint experience. Where I work, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, it's one of the leading research institutions in the world, and our job at our institute is to take all that R&D and develop products for emerging markets in health and agriculture and so on. Being from India and having lived through the Indian experience over the last couple of decades, I have a deep allergic reaction to this notion that people in the developing world have to settle for what I'd call mud and sticks technologies. In many ways, because of the challenges around infrastructure, lack of energy, lack of human capital to some extent, and institutions that are not necessarily strong, I would say that we need even better technology than what people and populations in industrialized countries need. And if you unpack that and what it means with respect to the big idea, I'll actually build on the things that have been mentioned so far around data and people. One of the things that's missing is an ID, an identification. If you think of in the developed world, how it is that that organizations, companies that sell stuff to us, how is it that they can sell us stuff that we really want? It's because they collect a lot of data based on the transactions we engage in, based on our behavior on the web, and so on and so forth. But all of that comes back to this notion of ID. They know who we are. In the United States, we have a social security number, which links back to our birth certificates and so on. In a lot of developing countries, because the institutional capacity isn't there to have the birth certificate, the question is, how do you create ID? And I believe that it's time to think of biometric identification systems, because then around that, you have the dignity that comes with being a person who's recognized by the state. And that ID, whether it's used to buy mobile services, whether it's used to pay for things, allows service providers to say, look, this is a unique person. That unique person is part of a segment. The 54 countries and 1 billion people that are in Africa, that is not one segment. It's probably thousands of segments, but we don't know what the segments are because we don't have that ID for individuals. We can't build segments around large clusters of those individuals. So that is my big idea, is moving towards a sophisticated system where we can use things like thumbprints to actually establish identification.
Excellent. I think there's no question, as everyone in the audience is thinking, is that immediately brings up the issues of privacy and other concerns. Having said that, I've personally witnessed the deployment of healthcare systems in Africa that could not happen in the United States because of HIPAA regulations concerning privacy. And so people are being helped in Africa, in this case it was Rwanda, in ways that people in Ohio are not able to be helped simply because of getting around that. So in some sense, there's an advantage and a disadvantage to the notion of privacy and identity as it relates. I think what I'd like to do with our remaining time, because we're about to tee off a slightly separate discussion, which hopefully will bring to point the opportunity, the risk, the excitement, and the outcomes for people that are stepping up to invention and entrepreneurship. And I have not prepped you guys for this, but be honest. When I ask you what your biggest failure is, what comes to mind? Tutu, what's your biggest failure?
I think my biggest failure is coming late. I spent 20 years working for a Swiss investment bank focused in emerging markets and made the decision to focus on Africa. And so my business and everything that I do, from the arts through to leadership, through to development, through to visionary work, is now focused on Africa. And I think my biggest failure is not having started on that journey 10 or 15 years early. Because with the access I have now and with some of the thinking that I'm developing, I do think that I could have made a significantly greater impact. And I think with myself and a few others, we'll be in a very different place. So my biggest failure is not focusing on my birthright far earlier on in my career.
Good. Shashi, briefly.
I'd say my biggest failure is not understanding the global value change when it comes to high tech. Going back to the Indian experience, one of the big lessons is that in pharmaceuticals, for instance, we don't have to be at the leading edge. All we have to do is be able to make very good generics at a much lower cost than what it costs the typical European or American company. And I think really recognizing what part specific countries and regions play in that global value chain of innovation is very important.
Great. John?
Well, so I'm divorced, so I would say that was probably one of the biggest failures.
That's awesome.
But leaving that out of the discussion, I would say my early experiments investing on the continent and not really understanding that the dynamics in Africa are different. They require, Jacqueline Novogratz likes to use the term patient capital. When it comes to the private sector, it's no different. You have to be thinking long-term as opposed to the typical relationship with investors and startups in the States is very short term. And so I would say the early experiments for us as Appfrica investing on the continent were probably not designed in the best way for the entrepreneurs. We've since learned from that, and we make much better decisions now.
Great. Rob?
I was actually going to joke similarly to John and say that I assume your question is strictly professional in nature.
I almost gave the additional latitude when I asked the question, but then I decided that keep it tight. But no, I'm glad. I mean, it should be the thing that pops out. So.
Sure. So for me, in the context of the Awethu project and what we're working on now, I think one of the biggest failures we made early on in the first year and a half of trying to run our project at scale was a bet that we made wrong on how personal economic calculus works at different ends of the economic spectrum. So we designed our model to work on our incubation and launching ventures with entrepreneurs from the informal sector, where it was predicated on being able to split fees, split upside that we made together. And we made that on a very sort of deferred gratification basis, thinking about NPV and long-term value creation and what's the greatest value. And it sounds, very naive and almost stupid in retrospect. But a lot of the entrepreneurs we started working with and creating real value with wouldn't pay us those fees.
Got it.
Right? Because their priorities, their calculus was just different. Wanting to put food on the table that night rather than worry about a big payout in 5 years. And so misunderstanding those individual level microeconomic decisions was a big wake-up call for us and has radically changed the way we design our program now, how we structure our contracts, how we structure our program.
Yep.
So it was a big early failure for us.
I've seen a number of different times where people are much more comfortable with.
Hang on a
yeah,
second.
go ahead.
What is your biggest failure?
I have a series of failures, and it's usually by being too early to certain technology markets with products or services. We had the first app store in 1995, which is why Google bought Motorola because of that. So there's been so many times where we've invested and produced great products, and unfortunately not been able to keep the path until we actually made it to market in a way. So, and I've got lots of personal failures. With our remaining time, though, what I'd like to do is take, for this great group, is to take maybe 2 questions, if there are 2 questions in the audience. There's one gentleman over here. We are our helpers with the mics. And is there one other one that I can, right here? If I'm missing anybody else, in the white dress. So here and then here. Okay, and one more if we have time. We'll be there. Please. And excuse me, be brief.
Oui, merci. Au mémé.
I will come back on failures. I'd like to know how much failure helped you succeed.
Who would like to take it?
We had a great discussion yesterday at another panel where we talked about failure a lot. And I said that you have to be sort of addicted to failing to succeed at all in business. And people challenge that on Twitter. And what I mean by that is no one is looking for the failure, but it's like when you reach the failures, that's when you know how to make a change to do what you're trying to do better. And so the goal is to look for those failures, not fail, make decisions based on what you see coming, and then pivot, as they say, to make better decisions.
So fast failure is really important.
Yeah.
Did you have one more thing to add to that? Okay, good. And then we'll take this question right here.
Christian Miluge, EasyGo service.
Do you think are the 3 more important steps to take to make a business successful?
So the 3 most important steps to take to make a business successful. Why don't I ask each one of you to say what's one of the most important steps to make a business successful? We'll go for Rob, one thing.
For me, it's unquestionably to build a great team around you. Have
a great team.
Have incredible people.
Okay, that's awesome. John?
Learn quickly, fail fast.
Learn quickly, fail fast. Awesome. Shashi?
Understand what being strategic means and be willing to change your strategy.
So understanding the difference between being strategic and tactical and moving accordingly. Okay, and Tutu?
truly believe in the business that you're building, it's quite infectious. If you're just doing it for pure monetary gain, it shows. When people walk in to see me and they don't truly believe in what they're doing, if you're not excited, I'm not excited.
So you got a bonus because you got 4, right? But no, this is important. But the idea is you've got a team, fail fast, be strategic, and believe in what you're doing, right? I think those are very, very important things. And I think with that, we're going to end this part of this session. And I'd like to thank you all. And again, these are all things that we should talk about a lot more. And I'd like everybody to keep their seats because they've very nicely given me the second half to do a format that has never been done before and may fail greatly, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you, gentlemen. So as we stay here, we're going to move on to the next section, which is something really exciting. It's